Hey everybody, OperationZ here, and we're continuing where we leave off in Joseph's story. We're on part 8 now, and we pick up where we leave off in 7, where, Joseph is sold to Potiphar by the Ishmaelite traders. And, when he's sold to Potiphar, pretty much Joseph is there and he makes the best of his awful situation. He keeps his chin up, he works hard, and he doesn't give up and have a loser attitude type demeanor, but he pushes through it and he chooses to, rather put his faith and trust in God for the hope of the future, and he probably doesn't know what, but he knows he had these prophetic dreams. And it's just like Jeremiah 29:11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, and plans to give you a hope and a future." And Joseph, he had that, you know, with God, that he had a hope and a future. And though he was in these rough circumstances, God was getting him through it, and he probably went through some rough, harsh things that nobody deserves, probably getting beaten with whips or hit with whips and beaten and all these things. And it's very possible that all that could have been going on, along with the poor sleeping conditions and, you know maybe not even the best food, which it could have been, because Potiphar being high status and wealthy, they probably did eat good. They could have, for the most part. But, he had all these awful things going for him, but he was able to see the other side of it because he believed in these prophetic dreams that he had, that there was something to them, that he had to just get through what he was going through in the present circumstances with patience and diligence and hope. And, that's where he's at right now. But Potiphar sees Joseph, and God shows Potiphar just how blessed Joseph is and how prosperous he is, and, how good of a, you know, how good this Semite slave is, how much of a goodly person for, like everything he's doing and whatnot. So he takes him and he promotes him and makes him overseer over his whole house. And when he makes him overseer over his whole house, God also blesses Potiphar's household for Joseph's sake. And Joseph is well favored and he's making it. His situation's already better right here at this point, for however long that might have been. But we're going to continue with the story, and we're in Genesis chapter 39, verse 7. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me." So, that's a very bad situation, especially for him being just a servant, even though he is a high status servant, an overseer, it's still a bad position for him because the master of the house's wife is basically, saying these things with him and all that. And it causes a big issue for Joseph, as we'll see going through with the text. But Genesis chapter 39, verse 8, "But he refused and said unto his master's wife, Behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath to my hand." So we see Joseph's character, like he probably could have gotten away with doing that, but he had a righteous character where he said, basically, no, you are Potiphar's wife, and I'm not to do that, and he's saying, basically, everything is committed onto my hand, and I'm going to be loyal to my master. He's loyal to his master Potiphar, because of the good that he's shown him and all these things. And, he's just going to basically, he's turning that down and trying to do what's right, not just in Potiphar's eyes, but also in the eyes of the Most High God, that, it's not his wife, that it's Potiphar's wife. So, Genesis chapter 39, verse 9 says this: There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? So basically, again, he's just confirming, hey, Potiphar's done really good by me. Potiphar's given me this, he's given me that. I'm ruler over everything in the house under him. And how can I do this great wickedness and sin against my God? He absolutely outright refuses to do it, resisting that temptation that was probably, basically he just needs to resist what's going on, and he does. He does it with full force in this matter, that he's basically saying, no, this is not right, I will not do it. But in Genesis chapter 39, verse 10, and it came to pass, as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her, to lie by her, or to be with her. So that's where we're at right there. Basically, every day she's just enticing him and doing her best to pretty much betray her husband in that and what she's doing here, and cause problems for Joseph. And Joseph refuses to do that, and we just see pretty much his character again, that he has a righteous character, that it goes against his belief system and what's right and wrong, what God chose for him to do, but also he has a loyalty towards Potiphar, and basically it's come to the point he's accepted that he's a servant, and he sees himself as a loyal servant to Potiphar, who purchased him and who was also good to him and whatnot, and gave him such an elevated position, and he just refused to betray him. So Genesis chapter 39, verse 11, and it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men in the house there within. So that's a bad situation for Joseph, because nobody's around, and there's no witnesses to anything that would happen. So it's going to be a slave's word against the wife of the master of the house, which is what it comes down to with Potiphar's wife here. And it's just a bad situation for Joseph. And we just see what happens as we go on here. But Genesis chapter 39, verse 12, and she caught him by the garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. So he shows that good conduct, and he leaves, and she has his garment. And pretty much, pretty much that's where we leave off here with this. But, we just see pretty much that it's not a good situation for Joseph. And we just see that, his situation, it could have been a lot worse for him. He's grateful to Potiphar because pretty much Potiphar, did all the good for him. He could have went to a lot harsher of a master than Potiphar. And, it could have been just really cruel treatment, and it could have been, just total abuse every day. But he got Potiphar, a, high status, prestiged officer, not just an officer, but captain of the guard to Pharaoh, the, high status king of Egypt. And, pretty much he's there, and, again, he's accepted his life circumstances that, he was nothing more than a servant now, once a beloved son of his father that just pretty much, really loved his son, and it's seen above all the brethren and all that. He goes from that to this very humbled, very harsh condition of what, like one of the worst things that really could have happened to him, going and being a slave to someone in a different country, and all that happens to Joseph. And now he has this problem. Like, everything was looking good and everything was going on the upside for Joseph, right? Because he's got all this going on, and it's working out for him. He's not only surviving in his circumstances, but he's also thriving. But now he's got this problem that just kind of gets sprung on him here, and we see his character. We see, strong, good conduct, and just that right demeanor and behavior to have that, we just see that in his conduct and what he does, what he says, and we know it happened exactly as it says right here, because, this is quite literally the word of God, and I say that because, Moses might have been the one writing it, but being a prophet of the Lord, God gave Moses the pretty much everything that happens in the story. Like, he sees it all unfolded basically the way that God shows him, and like, it wasn't Abraham or Joseph or Jacob or none of them that wrote Genesis. It was actually Moses, and Moses wrote Genesis and Exodus, and I think Joshua ends up writing some of the other books, like, that go on down past that, and with the storyline. I can't remember like exactly on that, but we do know that Moses wrote this, but it's by the hand of God, that Moses was the vessel that God chose to use, and as a holy oracle, basically it was given to him to know exactly everything that happened, word for word, dot for dot. Like, everything that is in here, it's pretty much it exactly happened just like that. So we know that Joseph was, very, like we know that it was exactly like this, right? Because we see that he had that integrity, and we see that he had that demeanor, and, that's just the type of person that Joseph was, and he chose to do what the right thing was to do in the circumstances, even though, as we're going to see, it just gets him in an even worse situation. Like, and there's nothing he could have done about it because he's just a servant living under Potiphar. And it's a slave's word against a non-slave, non-Semite, yet Egyptian's word. And it just is a bad situation that he finds himself in. And that's the story for right here, and you all have a blessed day.